I came home from surgery still feeling dizzy and weak. All I wanted was to rest, maybe have a cup of tea, maybe hear my son ask how I was doing. But when I turned into the driveway, I froze. 5 garbage bags were lined up by the gate. My clothes, my books, my life. My son and his wife were standing there waiting. She smiled like it was just another chore to finish. "You're too old, Mom. It's time for you to live somewhere else." That's what she said. My son didn't even look up. I stood there with my hospital papers still in my hand, trying to understand how my own family had decided I didn't belong anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just said, "All right," and walked back to my car. I didn't know it then, but that moment right there by the gate was the beginning of everything that came next. What would you do if your own child told you to leave your home? My name is Clara Jennings. I'm 68 years old, a retired librarian, and I've lived in Rosehaven, Vermont for most of my life. I lost my husband 10 years ago to cancer, and since then, I've been living quietly, reading, gardening, helping at the local library when I could. I'm not rich, not poor, just one of those women who've worked hard, paid off a small house, and tried to raise a good son. That's what I thought I'd done. I had just come home from gallbladder surgery that morning. The hospital had released me early because I was recovering well. My body felt sore and heavy, but I was happy to finally go home, to my bed, my porch, my books. I imagined Aaron, my son, would help me get settled. Maybe Brianna, his wife, would have made tea. But when the taxi turned onto Maple Lane, I saw something I'll never forget. 5 black garbage bags lined up by the gate. They looked so out of place against the white fence. The driver slowed down. "This your stop, ma'am?" he asked. It was. I told him to wait a moment and stepped out slowly, holding my hospital papers. That's when I saw Aaron and Brianna standing near the porch. Their faces were blank, arms crossed, not even pretending to smile. Brianna spoke first. "We think you need a more convenient place to stay," she said, like she was explaining a hotel reservation. "You shouldn't be alone here. It's too much for you." I looked at her, then at my son. "Convenient for who?" I asked. Aaron shifted his weight but didn't answer. He looked tired or maybe just done with the conversation before it began. Brianna gave a small laugh, the kind that hides discomfort. "Don't misunderstand, Mom. We're doing this for you. We just want what's best." I remember the wind that day, cold, sharp, cutting through my hospital gown under the coat. The smell of disinfectant from my skin mixed with the sour stench of trash. My chest hurt where the incision was, but that pain felt small compared to what I was feeling inside. I looked at the house. My curtains were gone, replaced by thin white ones I'd never seen before. The porch looked cleaner, emptier. It already didn't feel like mine. "What's best for me," I said quietly, "would have been coming home to my own bed." No one said a word. For a moment, I thought maybe Aaron would come closer. Maybe he'd realize how cruel this was. But he didn't move. He just stood there, eyes down, letting his wife speak for both of them. The taxi driver stepped out. "You need help with the bags, ma'am?" I shook my head. My voice wouldn't come out. I walked over to the gate and touched one of the garbage bags. It was lighter than I expected. Inside were my clothes, my photo albums, some old books wrapped in towels, a lifetime, all sorted and bagged neatly. Brianna stepped forward. "Please, Mom, don't make this harder." I looked right at her. "If you really wanted to make things easier," I said, "you wouldn't have thrown my things out like trash." Her smile faded. Aaron sighed. "Mom, please," he said softly, "let's not turn this into drama." That word, drama, cut deeper than anything else. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just turned back to the taxi, one bag at a time. The driver tried to help, but I waved him off. It felt important to do it myself, to lift every piece of what they decided was no longer worth keeping. When the last bag was in the trunk, I stood there facing the 2 people I used to call family. "Well," I said, "I guess that settles it." No one replied. Brianna looked away. Aaron's hands were in his pockets. I got in the car and told the driver the Maple Motel near the hospital. As we pulled away, I looked through the rear window. Brianna was already walking back inside. Aaron stayed by the gate for a few seconds, then disappeared behind the door. I thought the tears would come once we turned the corner, but they didn't. I just stared out at the road, realizing how strange it felt to be unwanted in the only home I'd ever built. That night, in the small motel room, I set the 5 bags against the wall and sat on the bed. The room smelled like bleach and old carpet. I didn't unpack. I just sat there, listening to the quiet, my mind replaying that moment at the gate. For 68 years, I'd believed kindness would always be returned. That family would never shut their door on you. But that night, I learned something else entirely. Sometimes being thrown away is how you finally realize your own worth. The motel room was small, just a bed, a plastic chair, and a desk with a lamp that flickered when I turned it on. The kind of place you rent by the week, maybe by the hour, when you have nowhere else to go. The air smelled like old coffee and cleaning spray. I closed the curtains and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the 5 garbage bags lined neatly by the wall. My life, my mistakes, my proof of how easily family can decide you're unnecessary. I started opening them, one by one. The first bag held my clothes. Folded neatly, though I could tell Brianna had done it fast. Everything smelled like her perfume, not my detergent. The second bag had kitchen towels, a few picture frames, my library mug. The third one was heavier, old books, the kind I'd kept since my first years at the library. Their covers were worn, corners bent from the hands of people who'd loved them before me. I picked one up, opened it, and found a small yellow sticker with my handwriting, returned by June 1998. I smiled. I'd always been the one reminding everyone else to return what they borrowed. Now I was the one being returned, just not to where I belonged. The fourth bag was mostly papers and mail I'd stacked near my desk. I pulled out an envelope, then another, sorting through bank statements, utility bills, medical forms. Somewhere near the bottom, a brown notebook caught my eye. Its corners soft, pages yellowed from time. I opened it carefully, and there he was, Aaron, at 7 years old, in a photo taped to the first page. Missing front teeth, holding a book almost bigger than his face. My handwriting beside it read, "First library day with Mom." The memory came back like a movie. I saw us again sitting in the children's corner of Rosehaven Public Library. I was younger then, my hair darker, my voice full of patience. Aaron sat cross-legged beside me, eyes bright as I read aloud. "Mom, why do we have to read all these books?" he'd asked, kicking his sneakers together. "Because, sweetheart," I told him, "if you read enough, you'll know what's right. And if I read the wrong ones, then you'll forget what's right. That's why we choose carefully." He'd laughed and said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll make you proud one day." I closed the notebook and held it against my chest. He had made me proud for a while. Good grades, scholarships, friends who called him smart and kind. And then, somewhere between his first job and his first taste of success, he stopped calling, stopped visiting. Until one day he came back, not because he missed me, but because his startup was struggling and he needed a place to stay. That's when things started to change. At first, it was small things. Brianna swapped my heavy curtains for thin white ones to brighten the space. She replaced my framed family photo with some abstract painting she'd bought online. Then she changed the locks for safety, she'd said, and handed me a new set of keys. I didn't realize it then, but she wasn't giving me keys. She was taking ownership, one door at a time. I pulled another photo from the bag, Aaron and Brianna on their wedding day. I remembered sitting in the second row at the church, wearing a blue dress that Brianna said was too old-fashioned. I'd smiled through the ceremony, believing it was just a difference in taste. I didn't understand that it was the beginning of being erased. I set the photo down and opened the last envelope from the pile of mail. A single page fluttered out, white, crisp, recent. It was a bank receipt. The logo looked familiar. My name was printed on the top line, Clara Jennings. But the line underneath made my stomach tighten. Payment received, mortgage installment, $2,750. Account holder, A. Jennings. I read it twice. Then again. I'd paid off my house 20 years ago. Why would there be a mortgage? Why would the payment be under my son's name? I looked closer. The bank name matched the one Aaron used for his business. My hands started to shake. A noise from the hallway made me look up. The clock ticked loudly, the kind of sound that fills a room when you're trying not to think. I sat there for a long minute, staring at the receipt, feeling my heartbeat rise. There had to be a mistake. Maybe he'd used my address for something. Maybe it was some kind of mix-up. But a small, cold part of me whispered that it wasn't, that this was the real reason I'd been thrown out. I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. In the quiet, I remembered something my old friend Margaret once said after her son moved to New York and stopped calling. When our children start to believe they've made it, they forget we were the ones who helped them climb. It's nature, Clara. They move forward and we're supposed to vanish. I'd laughed then. It didn't seem true. But sitting in that motel room with a $200,000 mortgage receipt in my lap, I realized Margaret had been right. I picked up the paper again. The line account holder. A. Jennings stared back at me like an accusation. It hit me slowly, painfully. Aaron hadn't just erased me from my home. He'd used me, my name, my house, everything I'd built, to secure his own future. For the first time that day, I felt something stronger than sadness. It wasn't anger yet, but it was close. It was the beginning of it. The moment when a mother stops asking why and starts thinking how. I folded the receipt and slipped it into the notebook, right next to Aaron's photo. The little boy with missing teeth looked so innocent there, frozen in time. "You said you'd make me proud," I whispered. "Well, son, you did. Just not the way you think." Then I turned off the flickering lamp, lay down on the bed, and stared into the dark. Tomorrow, I'd find out exactly what that $200,000 meant, and what else my son had borrowed in my name. The morning after I found that bank receipt, I woke up before sunrise. I hadn't slept much. The air in the motel room was heavy, thick with the smell of bleach and coffee from the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my wallet. Inside, among old membership cards and folded receipts, was a small cream-colored business card. Elaine Whitford, Whitford Kitchens, founder and CEO. I remembered how I'd met her. She was browsing in the library where I used to volunteer, looking for books about women entrepreneurs. We talked about recipes, about how both of us had learned to keep going after loss. Before she left, she'd smiled and handed me her card. "If you ever get bored of retirement," she said, "come find me. I'm always looking for stubborn women." I'd laughed at the time. Now I stared at that card like it was a lifeline. I hesitated for a few minutes, then dialed the number. It rang twice before I heard her voice. Smooth, confident, a woman who'd long stopped asking for permission. "Whitford Kitchens, Elaine speaking." "Elaine, this is Clara Jennings. We met at the library about a year ago." "Clara, of course I remember. You helped me find that biography about the restaurant owner who started at 65. How are you?" I swallowed hard. "I've been better." There was a pause, then her tone softened. "You sound like a woman who's had enough of being polite. Come see me, Clara, today." Her office sat above the town square in downtown Rosehaven, all glass and sunlight. The moment I stepped in, I felt small and unprepared. The floors were light oak, the walls painted in soft cream. There was a koi pond built into the corner, bright orange fish gliding silently through the water. Everything looked calm, deliberate, powerful. Elaine appeared from her office wearing a deep blue dress that caught the light like satin. Her silver hair was pinned neatly, her steps steady, purposeful. She didn't hug me. She just placed a hand on my arm and said, "You look like someone who's been holding her breath for too long." We sat near the window, the winter light spilling across the table. I told her everything. The garbage bags, the eviction, the mortgage I didn't know existed. The way Aaron looked at me like I was a problem he'd finally solved. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked halfway through. Elaine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and poured tea from a porcelain pot. "You know," she said, "they told me I was too old to start a business at 70, that no one would take a grandmother seriously in the restaurant world. Now they call me the Queen of Vermont. Funny how that works." I managed a small smile. "So you proved them wrong." "Oh, I didn't prove them wrong," she said, handing me a cup. "I just stopped caring what they thought. That's the difference." For a while, we sat in silence, sipping tea. Then she looked straight at me. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago. I had a daughter, Isabel. Brilliant girl. I built Whitford Kitchens for her, so she'd never have to worry about money. When she turned 35, she took the company from me, signed papers I didn't read, pushed me out. I spent a year thinking I was finished. Then I hired a lawyer, learned the system, and took it back, legally, publicly, completely. She hasn't spoken to me since." Her voice didn't tremble. If anything, there was pride in it. "We're from a generation that thinks forgiveness means weakness," she continued. "But sometimes, not forgiving is what keeps you alive." I stared at the koi pond, at the slow, graceful movements beneath the surface. I don't even know where to start, I admitted. I don't have a business or money or anything left. Elaine smiled, but it wasn't a soft smile, it was sharp, knowing. If your son threw you out of the door, she said, then we'll build you another one, right across the street from his wife's boutique. I blinked. You can't be serious. Completely serious. I've been thinking of expanding Whitford Kitchens into a new brand, something smaller, warmer, local. I'd need someone who understands people, not just profit. You've served half this town coffee and stories for decades. You know them better than anyone. It sounded impossible, ridiculous. And yet, for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel so tight. You don't even know if I can run anything, I said quietly. Elaine leaned forward. You ran a household on a librarian's salary, raised a son on your own, and managed not to lose your kindness completely. That's management, Clara. I laughed, short and tired. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said, but it's possible. And possible is all you need right now. I watched her, the way she sat, straight-backed, calm, sure of herself. She wasn't just offering me a job. She was offering me a way to stand again. Outside the window, the town square was bright and busy, people walking to lunch, children running between shops. Life, still moving, even when yours had fallen apart. Elaine refilled my tea and said, You can stay broken or you can start building. I'll help you either way. I looked down at the steaming cup, my reflection rippling on the surface. And if I fail, then you'll fail standing, not begging. For the first time since that day by the gate, I felt something flicker inside me. Hope, maybe, or defiance. They felt the same. I looked at her and nodded slowly. All right, let's build that door. Elaine smiled. Good. We'll start tomorrow. That night, when I came back to the motel, I poured myself a cup of tea from the room's kettle and sat by the window. The lights from downtown shimmered faintly in the distance, somewhere near Elaine's office. I thought about what she'd said, about doors, about not forgiving. People had looked at me these past few weeks like I was done, an old woman with no future. But maybe they were wrong. I lifted the cup and whispered to the empty room, When they think a mother's gone, maybe she's just catching her breath. The next morning, Elaine called me earlier than I expected. Her voice carried that calm authority of someone who had made up her mind long before you did. Clara, I've arranged a meeting for you, she said. There's someone you need to meet. She didn't say who, only gave me an address. Downtown Rosehaven, across from Willow Boutique. Willow Boutique, Brianna's store. For a moment I hesitated. That name still hit a nerve. But something in Elaine's tone told me to trust her. When I arrived, Elaine was already standing on the sidewalk, wearing her blue dress again, this time with a wool coat draped over her shoulders. Beside her was a man in his mid-60s, tall, tidy, with kind eyes, and the look of someone who preferred action to talk. Clara, meet Edmund Hughes, though everyone calls him Ed, Elaine said. He owns this property and the strip of shops across the street. Ed reached out his hand, his grip firm but not forced. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Jennings. Elaine tells me you're the woman with the good ideas. I almost laughed. That's news to me, he smiled. Then let's make some new ones. Elaine gestured toward the vacant storefront behind them. The space looked tired. Dust on the windows, faded paint, a for-lease sign hanging crooked. But even through the grime, I saw potential. A large front window, brick walls, a warm light filtering through cracks in the blinds. This, Elaine said, is where we start. I blinked. Start what? A cafe, she said simply. A place that serves real food, the kind people come back for. Not because it's trendy, but because it feels like home. I looked at her, then at Ed, who nodded in agreement. We get plenty of tourists, he said, but what we don't have is a place locals can actually love. People here are tired of overpriced coffee and avocado toast. I felt my pulse quicken. You mean you want me to help run it? Not help, Elaine corrected, own it, with my investment, your experience, and Ed's connections. It sounded insane. I hadn't even figured out where I'd be living next month. And here they were, talking about business. But as I looked across the street at Brianna's boutique, with its pristine glass door and trendy window display, something inside me shifted. Maybe I didn't want revenge. Maybe I just wanted proof, to myself, to them, that I wasn't done yet. Why me? I asked softly. You could find someone younger with more energy, more experience. Elaine poured coffee from a thermos she'd brought and handed me a cup. Because you're the kind of woman who's already built something out of nothing, she said. You just forgot how to call it success. Ed nodded. And because people like you know what comfort food really means. You've fed people when you had nothing to give. That's what sells here, not trends, but truth. I looked into the empty shop again. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, gray hair, tired eyes, but still standing. What would we call it? I asked. Elaine grinned. Harvest Table Cafe. It sounds like a place where people gather after surviving something hard. That name felt right, warm, solid, real. We stepped inside to look around. The floors creaked, the walls needed paint, and the air smelled of dust and possibility. Elaine started talking logistics. She'd provide capital for renovations. Ed would coordinate the permits and contractors. My job would be everything else. Concept, design, menu, community. Think of it as rebuilding your life in the shape of a restaurant, Elaine said. We sat on overturned buckets near the window as Ed took notes on a pad. I found myself talking more than I expected. About recipes, about what people really wanted to eat when they were tired or lonely. Apple pie, I said. Warm, but not too sweet. Something that smells like forgiveness. Chowder, Ed added. The kind with real cream and no shortcuts. And sandwiches, I said. Big ones, messy, made with love, not measurements. Elaine listened, smiling. Food is the language of survival, she said finally. We all speak it when we're hungry enough. I nodded. And I've lived long enough to know how to season survival. For a moment, the three of us sat in silence, just letting the idea breathe. The space didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. Over the next week, we began sketching out a real plan. Elaine handled the financing and paperwork. She moved through legal documents like a woman dancing through a familiar song. Ed made calls to local builders, electricians, and sign makers. And me, I started collecting things that reminded me of home. From the thrift store, I bought a stack of old books with worn covers and golden spines. They'll go on the wall, I told Ed. People should feel like they're eating inside a story. He smiled. Then we'll build shelves strong enough to hold them. Elaine brought fabric swatches for curtains, pale yellows and greens, soft light that made you want to stay. Every choice had purpose. Every detail felt like a piece of me stitched back together. One afternoon, we gathered around the table in her office to sign the paperwork, the lease, the permits, the official documents that would make Harvest Table Cafe real. As I signed, my hand trembled, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in months. Belonging. Elaine leaned back, satisfied. There, she said. Now, let them learn what real value looks like. Across the street, through the wide glass window, I could see Brianna arranging a new display at her boutique. Bright dresses, perfect lighting, her favorite place to pose for social media. She hadn't noticed us. Not yet. I capped the pen, set it down, and looked at Elaine and Ed. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. I just want them to have to see me, every single day. Elaine smiled, her voice calm and certain. Then let's give them something worth looking at. It had been almost 3 weeks since I'd signed the papers for Harvest Table Cafe. Elaine said the contractors would start soon. Ed was working on permits, and for the first time in months, I woke up with something like purpose. But there were still loose ends to tie up. Old mail, tax forms, and bank documents that had been sent to my address. So one morning, I decided to go back. The drive to my old neighborhood felt shorter than I remembered, maybe because I was already somewhere else in my head. The street looked the same, neat lawns, trimmed hedges, the same dog barking 2 houses down, but when I pulled into my driveway, my stomach twisted. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. The siding had been repainted a cold shade of gray, the cheerful blue shutters replaced with black. The curtains were different too, thin white ones that let in too much light, the kind Brianna liked to call modern. I stood there for a moment, just looking. It wasn't anger I felt. It was disorientation, like walking into a stranger's memory. I took a deep breath, walked to the front door, and knocked. I still had my key, but I didn't want to use it. Brianna opened the door. She was in yoga pants and a beige sweater, her hair perfectly tied back. The smell hit me immediately. Something sweet, chemical, heavy. Vanilla musk. The kind of scent that tried to pass for warmth, but only reminded you of something artificial. Clara, she said, sounding genuinely surprised. Oh, I didn't know you were coming. I came to collect my mail, I said evenly. I called Aaron, but he didn't answer. She stepped aside reluctantly. Sure, it's on the kitchen counter. I walked in. The air was different, too warm, too staged. The walls were now painted a soft gray. Storm, she'd probably call it, and every picture that had once made the house a home was gone. In their place were framed prints of beaches and abstract art. Clean, lifeless, expensive. Where my husband's photo used to hang in the hallway, there was now a mirror. I glanced at my reflection and barely recognized myself. We're just refreshing the space, Brianna said behind me. The old energy was too heavy. We wanted something lighter. I turned to her, my voice calm but sharp. The house isn't heavy because of the walls, Brianna. It's heavy because of the people who live in it. She blinked, taken aback. Then she smiled that rehearsed smile, the one she used when she was trying to sound kind but really wasn't. You always had such a way with words. I ignored her and walked toward the living room. My bookshelves were gone. The armchair where I used to read had been replaced by a sleek white couch, and in the corner on the side table sat a photo frame, face down. I knew that frame. It had been there since the day my husband Robert passed away. I reached for it, turned it over, and there he was, still smiling, still young in that picture we'd taken on our 25th anniversary. The glass was cracked down the middle. Why is this face down? I asked quietly. Brianna hesitated. I think it fell when we were redecorating. I didn't want the glass to scratch the table. Of course she didn't. She'd rather bury a memory than dust it. I put the frame back exactly where it belonged, upright. He bought this house, you know. Every inch of it was paid for by his double shifts and my library hours. So if it's too heavy for you, maybe that's because it was built with real effort. Brianna crossed her arms. I don't think we need to make this personal, Clara. I smiled faintly. It already is. I walked to the kitchen. The counters gleamed. The scent of that candle was stronger here, almost suffocating. I spotted the pile of mail on the marble surface, envelopes stacked haphazardly between Brianna's fashion magazines. Most of it was junk, but one thick white envelope stood out. Property Tax Department, Rosehaven County. My name printed clearly, Clara Jennings. I opened it without asking. Inside was a notice, a tax assessment form. The house value had increased again and the owner of record was still me. My heart thudded once, hard. Funny, I said softly. My name's still on the deed. Brianna froze. Oh, that's just temporary. Aaron's taking care of the paperwork. You know how slow the county is. Yes, I said, folding the paper carefully. I do know. I also know they don't just forget to change ownership for 3 months. Her voice wavered slightly. It's complicated, Clara. You really shouldn't worry about these things. I slipped the envelope into my bag. Oh, I worry about very little these days. But I do read everything. She didn't reply. Her phone buzzed and she took the call quickly, stepping away toward the dining room. Her voice turned soft, sugar-sweet, the one she used when she wanted something. I stayed in the kitchen a moment longer, running my hand over the countertop, over the faint scratches left from years of chopping, cooking, living. Every mark a memory. I thought of the rose bushes Robert and I had planted out back, the ones that bloomed in late May. I wondered if Brianna had pulled them out too. The candle on the counter flickered, its scent thick and fake. I blew it out. The silence that followed felt cleaner. Then I walked to the front door. Brianna was still on the phone, pretending I wasn't there. I'll see myself out, I said. No response. I stepped outside, closing the door quietly behind me. The air was cold but fresh, carrying the smell of pine and frost. I stood by my car for a moment, looking up at the house, the home I'd built, loved, and lost. It looked perfect now, but only from the outside. I reached into my bag and touched the tax notice. My name, still there. So, I whispered, they didn't just throw me out. They buried me inside the name they're still using. The wind caught my words and carried them away, like smoke from that candle I'd just blown out. I started the car, the engine humming softly, and as I drove off, I glanced at the house one last time in the mirror. The windows glowed warm and yellow like a stage set. But behind them I knew it was all hollow. I drove straight from the house to Elaine's office, the tax envelope still in my bag. I didn't even call first. She took one look at me and seemed to understand something was wrong. You found something, she said. I nodded and handed her the paper. She read it once, then again slower. "Still in your name," she murmured, "so the transfer never went through." Her face hardened the way it does when she's calculating, not angry. "Clara, we're not guessing anymore. This is proof that he's been using your property without legal authority." She reached for her phone and dialed a number. "Ruth, it's Elaine. I need you to come by the office now." Ruth Hollis arrived 40 minutes later, a short woman in her 70s, her hair silver white and cut close to her jaw. She wore no jewelry except a small gold wedding band and carried a leather portfolio thick with documents. Elaine introduced us. "Clara, this is Ruth. She's handled half the elder fraud cases in this county and won almost all of them." Ruth smiled faintly as she shook my hand. "Not because I'm lucky," she said, "because people always think old women are easy to fool. They make mistakes when they underestimate us." We sat at Elaine's glass table. Ruth spread out her papers, clipped her glasses on, and began asking questions. When I'd last signed anything, who had access to my mail, whether Aaron had ever mentioned refinancing or loans. I told her everything I could remember. She took notes quickly, precise, like a surgeon working through a checklist. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "Mrs. Jennings, I'm going to tell you something you already know but don't want to hear. The people who hurt us most are the ones who think we'll forgive them." Elaine crossed her arms. "What do we do next?" Ruth flipped through her folder. "We start with the county records. If a property loan or mortgage was filed under your name, it'll be registered publicly. I'll pull every document tied to your address and see what's been done in the last 2 years." She paused, eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "You said your son's startup was struggling?" I nodded. "Then I can tell you exactly what happened," she said. "He used your house as collateral to keep his business alive. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. People like your son count on the fact that you love them too much to notice until it's too late." Her voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. The truth spoken by someone who's seen it too many times. 2 days later, Ruth called us both back to Elaine's office. I could tell by the weight of her expression before she even sat down that she'd found something. 3 documents, she said, opening her folder. All filed within the last 18 months. All mortgage agreements, and every one of them has your signature. She laid them on the table one by one. I stared at them, my name, written neatly in black ink. The loops of the C and J almost perfect. Almost. "I didn't sign these," I said quietly. "I know," Ruth replied. "These are forgeries. The pen pressure, the ink type, even the spacing. It's consistent, but not identical to your legal signature. Whoever did this had copies of your paperwork, probably from your old filing cabinet or online scans." Elaine's voice turned sharp. "Can we prove it?" "Yes. And once we do, it's not just fraud, it's a felony. Forging financial documents, identity misuse, property theft. The penalties are serious." I kept looking at the signatures, my own name staring back at me like a ghost. It didn't feel real. "When he was a boy," I said softly, "I taught him how to write his name. We practiced every night after dinner until he could sign it perfectly." My voice didn't break. It didn't even shake. Now he's teaching me what that lesson costs. The room was quiet. Even Elaine didn't speak for a moment. Ruth finally said, "This happens more often than you'd believe. People trust their children with documents, passwords, access. Most don't realize they've been robbed until the bills arrive." She took off her glasses and rubbed her temples. "My own mother nearly lost her savings that way. My sister, her own daughter, talked her into signing a power of attorney. I caught it just in time. That's why I do this work now, because not everyone gets lucky." Elaine's jaw tightened. "So what's our next move?" Ruth gathered the papers neatly. "First, we file a fraud claim with the county. Then we freeze the property and contact the bank that issued these loans. They'll open an internal investigation. Once they verify the forgery, the assets are frozen and your name is cleared." "How long will it take?" I asked. "Weeks, maybe months," Ruth said. "But once the process starts, it's like setting a clock. The truth moves slowly, but it moves." Elaine turned to me. "Clara, this is your decision. Do you want to press charges against your son?" I thought about it. About Aaron as a boy, sitting on the kitchen floor building Lego castles. About how proud I'd been when he graduated. About the look on his face when he told me to leave my own home. "If I don't," I said, "he'll do it again, to someone else. Maybe someone who doesn't have a Ruth or an Elaine." Ruth nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Good. Then we'll do it right, quietly, carefully, legally. She began collecting her files, her voice steady. Justice doesn't run fast, Mrs. Jennings, she said, but it never loses its way. I looked at her, then at Elaine, and folded my hands together on the table. I read that once, I murmured. Justice isn't quick, but it knows the road. Elaine smiled faintly. Then we'll follow it. That night, as I drove back to the motel, the roads were empty, the sky deep blue with rain clouds. I thought about the signatures, the paper, the ink, about the way my son's name and mine now lived side by side on stolen documents. There was no anger anymore, just clarity. Tomorrow the real work would begin. 3 days after Ruth uncovered the forged documents, the three of us met again, behind closed doors, blinds drawn, the soft hum of Elaine's koi pond faint in the background. The mood was different this time. There was no shock left, no disbelief. Only strategy. Elaine stood by the window, arms crossed, her expression sharp and focused. Ruth sat at the table, papers neatly stacked, pen in hand. I was quiet, watching them both. I had the strange feeling of being part of a chess game where the queen pieces had decided they were done playing defense. All right, Elaine began. Here's what we know. The house is still legally in Clara's name. The bank's investigation will take time, but the risk is that once they flag Aaron's company for fraud, they'll move to seize the collateral. Ruth nodded. And since the property technically belongs to Clara, they'll freeze everything tied to her until it's sorted out. Elaine tapped her pen against the table, eyes sharp. Then we move first. I'll buy the house through one of my holding companies. Cash offer, quick closing. That way the title transfers before the bank acts. Once the investigation clears Clara's name, the property reverts to my company. We protect the asset and remove Aaron's leverage. I looked between them. You can do that? Of course, Elaine said, smiling slightly. The trick to surviving people like your son is to let them think they've already beaten you, while you quietly rewrite the rules. For the first time, I almost laughed. It wasn't joy, it was relief disguised as amusement. The idea that after months of humiliation, I could fight back without shouting felt powerful. Ruth leaned forward. I'll handle the legal side. The purchase will look routine, nothing suspicious. Once it's finalized, we'll file a fraud complaint and submit the recorded phone evidence. Phone evidence? I asked. Ruth nodded. You'll have it soon. That afternoon, my phone rang while I was at Elaine's office. The caller ID flashed Aaron. My stomach tightened, but I answered. Mom. His voice came through shaky, hurried. Please just listen to me. You've got it all wrong. There's been a misunderstanding. Elaine silently gestured for me to put the call on speaker. Ruth pulled out her phone and pressed record. A misunderstanding? I repeated. Then explain why my signature is on loan documents I never saw. I didn't mean for it to go that far, Aaron stammered. The business was struggling, and I just borrowed against the property for a few months. I was going to fix it before anyone found out. I swear. Borrowed? My voice was calm. Too calm. Aaron, you forged my name. That's not borrowing. That's stealing. There was silence on the other end, just his uneven breathing. Mom, I didn't steal from you. I just needed time. I thought I could pay it back. Brianna didn't even know? Elaine raised an eyebrow. He's lying, she mouthed. Aaron, I said evenly, you're a grown man. You don't accidentally forge signatures. You do it because you think no one will notice. He said nothing, just the sound of a quiet sob, quickly covered with a cough. Please, Mom, he whispered, don't press charges. We can fix this together. You had your chance to fix it when you threw me out of my house, I said. Now I'm fixing it my way. I ended the call. Ruth's phone stopped recording. She looked up. That's enough. Clear confession, intent, admission, context. It'll hold. Elaine exhaled slowly. And Brianna? Ruth smiled thinly. Let's just say the neighborhood grapevine is already working for us. Later that evening, Elaine received a message from one of her acquaintances, a woman who lived across the street from my old house. She'd overheard Brianna shouting on the porch that afternoon. You said she wouldn't find out, Brianna had yelled. Now the lawyer's been calling and the neighbors are talking. What have you done, Aaron? The neighbor described hearing the door slam, glass breaking, and Aaron's car leaving fast. It didn't surprise me. I could picture it clearly, the panic, the blame, the unraveling. Elaine read the message aloud, then folded her phone with a quiet smile. They're turning on each other. That's usually how liars self-destruct. Ruth chuckled softly. We don't have to ruin them. They'll handle that themselves. The next morning we met again, same table, same room, but now there was energy in the air. Purpose. Ruth set a flash drive on the table. The recording's transcribed and time-stamped. I've filed for a fraud injunction. The paperwork's ready for the sale as well, Elaine. Elaine nodded. My company, Blue Haven Properties, will handle the purchase. I've already wired the funds to escrow. Once Clara signs, the title moves immediately. She turned to me. Are you ready? I took a deep breath. I've been ready since the day they lined those garbage bags by my gate. Elaine's smile was small but proud. Then let's finish this. I signed the document. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper felt final, deliberate, like closing a door that had been left open too long. Ruth gathered the papers, her voice firm. We'll file everything this afternoon. Once the bank receives notice of the property transfer, their hands are tied. Your son won't have access to another cent. Elaine leaned back, satisfied. See, Clara? We don't need to raise our voices. We don't need revenge. We just need paperwork. I looked at her, the calm certainty in her eyes, and nodded slowly. You're right, I said quietly. Now we don't have to shout. I closed my folder, my hands steady for the first time in months. We just have to file. That night, as I sat in my car outside the motel, I replayed the call in my head, the panic in Aaron's voice, the fear behind it. Once, I would have cried for him. Now, I just felt tired. He'd built his world on my trust. And now, that same trust was the thing that would bring it down. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but this time I wasn't alone. I had Elaine, Ruth, and the truth, written in ink and time-stamped for good measure. And the thing about truth is, once it's on paper, it stops being a secret. The courtroom in Vermont County Hall was full long before the hearing began. Every seat was taken. Townspeople, reporters from local newspapers, even a few from the state press. Some came out of curiosity, some because they couldn't believe what they'd read. A son accused of defrauding his elderly mother for over $200,000. I sat quietly at the front beside Ruth and Elaine. My hands were folded in my lap. Across the room, Aaron sat with his lawyer, the same boy I'd once taught to write his name, now avoiding my eyes. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in body but in spirit. The judge entered, a gray-haired man with a steady voice that filled the room. He glanced over the papers, nodded once, and began. We're here for the case of State of Vermont versus Aaron Jennings, charged with financial fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. The prosecutor stood and began presenting the evidence. It felt less like words and more like the slow turning of gears in a machine that could no longer stop. Ruth rose first, walking to the center with her folder. Her voice carried calm precision. Exhibit A, 3 loan agreements bearing the forged signature of Ms. Clara Jennings. Exhibit B, certified analysis confirming the signatures were copied from previous documents belonging to the victim. Exhibit C, a recorded phone call in which the defendant admits to borrowing funds using his mother's property as collateral. Her tone was even, professional, without cruelty. Then she added softly, almost like a sigh, Your Honor, these cases aren't rare. They're simply hidden behind family doors. The hardest theft to see is the one that wears love as its disguise. The judge nodded. The courtroom was silent. Even the clicking of cameras had stopped. Then Brianna was called to the stand. Her makeup was gone. Her voice trembled as she answered the prosecutor's questions. Did your husband ever discuss using his mother's assets for his business? She hesitated, tears gathering. Yes. He said she was old. She didn't need that house anymore, that it was just sitting there wasted. Did you agree with him? Her voice broke. No, I told him it was wrong, but he said it was temporary, that he'd fix it before she ever found out. When she stepped down, she didn't look at Aaron. He sat frozen, staring at the table, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The prosecutor turned to me. Mrs. Jennings, you are not required to speak, but the court will allow a statement if you wish to address the defendant. I stood up slowly. The room blurred under the lights and flashes. My heart was steady, not angry, not broken, just tired. I turned toward my son. Aaron, I said softly, When you were a little boy, we used to practice writing your name after dinner. You'd hold the pencil so tight your fingers cramped, but you kept going until every letter looked right. He didn't move. I guess I taught you well, I continued. Too well. I'm sorry I taught you to write your name before I taught you what it means to keep it honest. For a moment, the silence in the room felt endless. Even the judge looked down. I sat back down beside Ruth. She placed her hand lightly over mine, steady and grounding. After a short recess, the jury returned. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge read the sentence in a low, deliberate voice. 7 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 5, contingent on full restitution and cooperation with ongoing investigations. Aaron closed his eyes. He didn't look up. As the bailiff placed the cuffs around his wrists, I thought of the first time I'd ever held his hand, when he was born small and perfect, and I'd promised to keep him safe. Now I was watching him being led away for something I couldn't protect him from, himself. Flashes from the press cameras burst across the courtroom as the deputies escorted him out. Light after light, each one sharp, white, blinding. I flinched once, then closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't see the house, the garbage bags, or the forged papers. I just saw darkness, quiet, still, almost peaceful. When I opened my eyes again, Elaine was leaning toward me. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. She whispered, "Justice isn't about revenge, Clara. It's about finally being able to sleep." I nodded, breathing slowly. Then, maybe tonight I will. Outside, the winter air was sharp and clear. Reporters called my name, asking how it felt, what I would do next. I didn't answer. I just kept walking, the snow crunching under my shoes, the courthouse steps behind me fading into silence. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something loosen. Not forgiveness, not joy, but release. The kind that only comes when you stop waiting for an apology and start living again. And for the first time in a long while, I knew I could. The morning of the opening felt like a dream I'd been walking toward in slow motion. After everything, the hospital, the garbage bags, the court, it was strange to wake up and feel nervous about something good. The sign above the door read, Harvest Table Cafe, its letters carved into dark wood, the kind that would age beautifully with time. Ed had insisted on that detail. Wood should hold stories, he'd said. Elaine stood next to me as the first customers arrived, calm and radiant in her blue dress. "This is your day, Clara," she whispered. "Don't hide behind the counter. Let people see you." I nodded, though my hands were shaking a little. By 11:30, the line reached the door. Teachers from the local school, the hardware store clerk, the postman, even a few students from the nearby college, their laughter filling the air. The smell of apple pie and chowder soup drifted through the street, carried by the cold Vermont breeze. The cafe glowed from the inside, gold light, chatter, the clinking of spoons. The first bowl went to Mrs. Turner, my old neighbor from 2 streets over. She leaned over the counter, her silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears. "Clara, this chowder's so good," she said, wiping her mouth. "Tastes like an apology from life itself." I laughed softly, ladling another serving. Maybe that's just the flavor of moving on. By noon, every table was full. People talked about the colors, the smell, the wall of old books I'd built along the side, spines of faded blues and browns, little worlds lining the room. One customer pointed at a shelf copy of Anne of Green Gables and said, "You know, my grandmother had that same edition." That was exactly what I'd hoped for, to make people feel at home in a place that was brand new. Behind the counter, Ed handled the register like he'd been doing it for years. He wore an apron that looked 2 sizes too small, but he refused to take it off. Elaine moved through the crowd with quiet authority, greeting regulars, taking notes, smiling that rare, genuine smile of someone who'd already won their battles. Every so often I'd catch sight of something, or someone, through the cafe's front window. Across the street, the boutique stood empty. Its sign, Willow, had been taken down, the windows covered in brown paper. But behind that paper, through the slits where the light came through, I could see her, Brianna. She stood there frozen, watching. Her reflection overlapped with mine on the glass, 2 women on opposite sides of a story, one beginning again, the other realizing it was over. For a moment I didn't feel anger or pity, just a strange, quiet symmetry. Then a customer called my name, and the thought passed. At 1 o'clock, I finally sat down with a cup of coffee. My hands smelled like apples and flour, my apron like butter and cinnamon. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the hum of conversation. Around me, the low comfort of human noise. Elaine joined me at the table. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it," I replied. "You gave me a door. I just walked through it." She smiled, taking a sip of her tea. "And now you've built one for others." I looked around at the faces, laughing, eating, talking, and realized she was right. The cafe wasn't just food, it was proof. Proof that even when people try to erase you, you can rewrite yourself louder than before. The doorbell rang again, and Ed came in from outside, cheeks pink from the cold. He was holding a bouquet of sunflowers, bright as sunlight, against the wooden counter. He walked straight up to me and placed them down. "For you," he said, smiling, "for the first harvest." The petals brushed my wrist, soft and warm. For a second, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, not with sadness, but with something bigger. Gratitude, maybe. Or peace. I arranged the flowers in a tall glass vase near the register. Their reflection shimmered in the window, the golden heads turning toward the light. I caught my own reflection beside them, older, steadier, alive. "For the first harvest," I repeated quietly. "And not the last." Elaine looked at me, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Slow, soft, like a blessing that had finally found its way home. The cafe was closed for the night. The street outside glowed soft and gold under the lamplight, the snow falling slow and quiet, muffling everything except the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock above the door. I sat in the small kitchen at the back of Harvest Table Cafe, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, a single sheet of paper in front of me. The pen hovered in my hand for a long time before I began to write. "Dear Aaron, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll ever send it. But some things need to be written, even if no one's there to answer. You used to be the reason I believed in kindness. Now, you're the reason I believe in justice. When you were little, you used to fall a lot. I remember your first steps on the kitchen floor. You fell so hard your knees turned red. You cried, but you always stood back up. I thought that meant you were brave. Maybe it did. Maybe it still does, in a way I can't see yet. When you grew older, you stopped falling. You learned how to land on other people instead. I used to think that being a mother meant never letting go, no matter what. But now I know there's another kind of love, the kind that steps back and lets the truth do the teaching. You took what wasn't yours, Aaron. You took my house, my savings, my trust. But more than that, you took the version of yourself I thought I knew. The boy with the crooked smile who used to read books out loud just to make me laugh. The man I was so proud to call my son. I've tried to understand what went wrong. Maybe it was greed. Maybe fear. Maybe both. But whatever it was, it doesn't erase the fact that I loved you. Still do, somewhere deep in the quiet corners of myself. Love doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. They say prison is where people go to pay for what they've done. But I hope, for you, it's also a place where you start to see what really matters. Not money, not status, not the illusion of winning, but decency. The kind you can't buy, fake, or steal. I've learned a lot, too. I've learned that silence can be stronger than anger. That paper and ink can protect you more than tears. And that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to stop trying to save someone else. I don't know what kind of man you'll be when you walk out of that place. Maybe harder, maybe humbler. I just hope you remember that no matter what happens, I never hated you. I just finally chose myself. Love, Mom. I read the letter twice before folding it neatly. My hands didn't tremble this time. I placed it on the table beside the cold coffee and stared at it for a long time. The words felt heavier than the paper they were written on. That's how Elaine found me. She came through the back door, still wearing her coat, her hair dusted with snow. "You're still here," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Too many things in my head." She noticed the letter and nodded toward it. "You wrote to him?" "Just words," I said. "Ones he'll probably never see." Elaine picked it up gently, reading a few lines before looking at me. Her eyes softened, not pity, just understanding. "Don't tear it," she said. "Keep it. One day, you might want to remember what it felt like to forgive without forgetting." She found an old wooden recipe box on the shelf, the one that used to hold handwritten menus for the cafe. She opened it, placed the letter inside, and closed the lid quietly. "There," she said. "Now it'll wait. Just like mothers do." I didn't answer. I just looked at the box. It was simple, carved from maple, worn smooth from years of use. It seemed like the right place for something unfinished. When Elaine left, I sat back down, listening to the sound of snow tapping softly against the window. I thought about Aaron as a child again, how he'd wobble when he walked, his arms outstretched for balance, how every time he fell he'd look up at me with those big eyes, waiting for my hand, and how every time I'd give it. That was motherhood, always reaching out, even when it hurt. But now, looking at that box, I understood something I never had before. Maybe this time love meant not reaching out. Maybe letting him fall was the only way he'd ever learn to stand on his own. I touched the box lightly, my fingertips tracing the grain of the wood. "This time," I whispered, "I'll let you stand up by yourself, Aaron. No more hands to hold." The lights from the street flickered across the wall, casting slow, soft shadows. The cafe smelled faintly of apples and coffee, like warmth and memory. For the first time in years, my heart felt quiet. Outside, snow kept falling, slow, steady, and certain, covering every footprint that had ever led away from home, and for once I didn't feel the need to chase them. It was late autumn in Rosehaven, the kind of afternoon that glowed like an old photograph, soft gold light, drifting leaves, and a chill in the air that smelled faintly of wood smoke and lake water. The rush of the cafe's opening weeks had slowed. Harvest Table had found its rhythm. Every morning, I arrived before dawn to brew coffee, open the blinds, and watch the light spread across the floorboards like warm honey. Every night, I left with tired feet but a full heart. That Sunday, Ed stopped by just as we were closing. His cheeks were pink from the cold, and his jacket carried the crisp scent of pine. "Come on," he said. "Let's take a walk before it gets dark. The lake's too quiet to ignore today." I smiled, untied my apron, and followed him out. The path around Lake Rosehaven wound through tall maples and birch trees, their leaves turning every shade of yellow and copper. The wind stirred the branches, and a few leaves broke free, swirling through the air before landing gently on the water. The world felt hushed, like the lake itself was listening. We walked side by side in easy silence, our footsteps crunching against the gravel. Out on the water, a small group of ducks drifted lazily, their reflections rippling across the glassy surface. I pulled my coat tighter. "Feels like winter's coming early this year," I said. Ed chuckled softly. "Or maybe time's just moving faster than we want it to." He paused near the wooden pier, looking out across the lake. The sunlight caught the water, scattering tiny diamonds of light across his face. Then he turned toward me, his hands in his pockets, his expression unusually serious. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking about time a lot lately." I tilted my head, smiling. "Dangerous habit." He smiled back, but there was something tender behind it. When you get to our age, you stop thinking about what you can earn and start thinking about what you don't want to lose. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. "Not velvet, not fancy, just plain wood, polished smooth. I don't want to lose another 10 years waiting to tell you something I already know," he said quietly. "I need you, Clara, not because I'm lonely, not because you make the days easier, but because somehow you make them mean something again." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring that caught the light like a quiet secret. The reflection of the lake danced across it, blue, silver, alive. For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, my heart steady but full. I'd never thought about love like this, not grand, not young, not burning, just steady, real. The kind that arrives after the storm and asks, "Can I stay?" I took a breath. The wind carried the smell of fallen leaves and cold air. "Ed," I said softly, "I've lost a lot in this life. A house, a son, pieces of myself I didn't think I'd get back." He waited, his eyes warm and patient. "But I never lost the belief that I was still worth loving. Maybe that's why I'm still here." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "So, is that a yes?" I laughed, the sound surprising even me. "It's a don't make me wait for the spring to find out." He slipped the ring onto my finger. It was cool against my skin, light, simple, perfect. Then, without words, we just stood there, watching the sunlight fade over the lake, the surface rippling as a small flock of geese flew low across the water, their cries echoing in the distance. The wind brushed past, lifting the last of the golden leaves into the air. One landed on Ed's shoulder, another in my hair. He reached up and gently brushed it away, his fingers lingering for a second longer than necessary. We turned back toward the cafe as dusk settled. The windows of Harvest Table glowed in the distance, soft yellow light spilling across the street, the silhouette of a few customers still inside. From where we stood, it looked like a painting of warmth in the cold, a reminder that new beginnings didn't need noise. They just needed light. Ed took my hand as we walked. His palm was warm, rough, real. For two people who've been through hell, he said, we made something beautiful, didn't we? I squeezed his hand gently. We didn't make it. We earned it. We stopped at the edge of the lake one last time, looking back. The water mirrored the darkening sky, the trees, and us. Two figures side by side, small against the world, but no longer alone. You know, I said quietly, for years I thought love was something that faded, but maybe it doesn't fade. Maybe it just waits until you're ready to see it again. He smiled, his thumb brushing the back of my hand. Then, let's not keep it waiting any longer. The last of the sunlight slipped beneath the horizon. The cafe lights glimmered in the distance, our little corner of survival, hope, and warmth. And as we walked toward it, hand in hand, the reflection of its glow shimmered across the lake like a promise kept. A week after the first snow, the Rosehaven Chronicle ran a Sunday feature across its front page. Harvest Table Cafe, the place where justice smells like apple pie. The article told my story, though not all of it. It spoke of resilience, community, and second chances. It mentioned how a retired librarian had opened a cafe that became a gathering spot for everyone, from truck drivers to professors, a place that reminded people what comfort really meant. They didn't write about the courtrooms, the forged signatures, or the years of hurt behind it. They didn't have to. The scent of apple pie and chowder was already saying everything that mattered. That morning, I cut out the article, smoothed the paper, and placed it in a simple wooden frame. Then I hung it on the wall near the cafe's front window, where the sunlight could touch it every morning. For a long moment I just stood there, looking at the words printed in black and white. The reflection of the street shimmered across the glass, people walking, children laughing, the faint hum of life moving forward. I used to think my story ended at the gate, I murmured, but that was just the place where I started again. The lunch rush began soon after. Elaine sat at her usual corner table, sipping her tea and pretending to read the paper, though I knew she was really people-watching. Ed was in the back, fixing a squeaky shelf, humming a Sinatra song under his breath. At the counter, our youngest employee, Megan, barely 22, was restocking napkins. She was new, fresh out of college, bright-eyed and full of questions. She paused for a moment, staring at the framed article. "Miss Clara," she asked, "why'd you name it Harvest Table? It's such a calm name. I figured maybe you used to have a farm or something." I smiled. "No farm. Just a lot of growing to do." She tilted her head. "So, what do we harvest?" I looked around the cafe, at the crowded tables, the low laughter, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the air. At the people who'd once seen me as the woman who lost everything, now returning each week because something here made them feel whole again. "We harvest what we plant, Megan," I said softly. "And here, we plant trust." She smiled. "And what do we get in return?" I placed a hand on the counter, feeling the faint warmth of the wood, polished smooth from years of hands before ours. "Ourselves," I said. "We get ourselves back." Megan nodded as if she understood, even though she probably wouldn't until life had its way of teaching her too. She went back to work, humming quietly as she stacked cups by the espresso machine. Outside, the light shifted. A breeze came through the open door, carrying the scent of autumn, crisp leaves, roasted coffee, something sweet baking in the oven. The Harvest Table Cafe sign creaked slightly in the wind, the golden letters glinting against the sky. I glanced toward the window. Across the street, the old boutique space still stood empty. The glass was clean now, the For Lease sign gone, replaced by a reflection of my cafe's warm interior. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to look away. Elaine caught my eye and raised her teacup slightly, like a silent toast. I smiled back. Ed appeared from the back, his hands dusty from fixing the shelf. He handed me a fresh dish towel and said, "You've got flour on your cheek again." I wiped it, laughing. "Occupational hazard." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "It suits you, you know. The look of someone who's exactly where she's meant to be." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped lower, turning the world amber. The wind carried a swirl of red and gold leaves across the street. The sound of soft jazz floated through the cafe's speakers. Light, slow, alive. Through the window, I watched as a mother and her young son crossed the street hand in hand. He was laughing at something she said, and for a brief moment I saw my Aaron again. Small, smiling, whole. The ache that once followed that image didn't come this time. Instead, there was a quiet peace, the kind that settles deep like roots after a storm. I turned back to the cafe. Elaine was helping a customer carry pie boxes to the door. Megan was wiping tables, her ponytail swaying. Ed was adjusting the bouquet of sunflowers that still sat on the counter, their bright yellow petals catching the last light of the day. The whole place glowed, alive with motion, warmth, and the hum of living. I took one last look out the window. The leaves danced across the pavement. The street lamps flickered on one by one. Laughter drifted from a nearby table, and someone turned the music up just slightly. And I thought, not with bitterness, not with pride, but with quiet certainty, that this, right here, was what justice truly tasted like. Not cold or sharp, but warm. Slow, sweet, like apple pie cooling on a windowsill.